We are looking at states trying to organize baseline human survival. And, spoiler alert, almost all of them are failing.
Wow, okay. That is a very sharp pivot, but unfortunately entirely accurate.
Which perfectly sets up our mission for this deep dive. Because for those of you listening who have been following along with this massive project, we are finally at the finale recap for the Perfectly Homeless 50 States Scorecard.
Yeah, we made it.
We did. Every single state in America has now been scored across the same 6 distinct categories. So that's housing affordability, shelter access, criminalization and enforcement, vehicle dwelling friendliness, outreach and social services, and pathways to permanent housing.
It has been just a monumental amount of data to sift through. But now, we finally get to look at the entire map of America.
Right.
We're zooming out to a bird's eye view to see how the whole country shook out. We're identifying what actually works, what is completely breaking down, and honestly, what genuinely surprised us in the data.
Yeah, I was looking over the final tally last night, and it's basically like getting a nationwide report card.
Yeah.
But instead of grading math or science, we're grading how we treat the unhoused.
Hey, good
And
stuff.
honestly, when you look at the middle of the pack, the states that ranked 10 through 5, the grades are sitting right around a C or C+. So they aren't failing, but they certainly aren't passing with flying colors either.
Right, they're sitting squarely in the middle of the bell curve. But if you look past the letter grades, what unites these specific states is actually fascinating.
How so?
Well, they don't necessarily have comprehensive systemic solutions yet, but what they do have are incredibly innovative spot treatments for homelessness.
Our treatments.
Yeah, they are finding very specific friction points and applying these highly creative solutions just to those areas.
Okay, let's actually look at what that means in practice, starting with the state sitting at number 10. That's Maine. They pulled a C- overall.
Yeah.
But their report card is just a wild mix of extremes.
It really is.
Like, they scored A- on outreach, which is phenomenal. But they were completely dragged down by a dismal shelter access score. I mean, what is the point of an A- in outreach if you have nowhere to put people? Isn't that just pointing at the problem?
That is exactly the friction point. I mean, an A- in outreach means Maine is exceptionally good at the hardest part of the job.
Finding the people in the first place.
Right. Finding people who are experiencing homelessness, building trust over weeks or even months, and locating vulnerable populations out in really rural areas. But that weak shelter access score just creates a devastating bottleneck.
Because the outreach worker finally convinces someone to come inside and then has to be like, sorry, there are no beds.
Exactly. You totally shatter the trust you just built. It's a classic example of one half of a bureaucratic system completely outpacing the other. Like, Maine is doing the legwork to find people, but the physical infrastructure simply hasn't been built to absorb them.
And that's tough. So if Maine is struggling with the macro level physical space, it makes sense to look at a state targeting something much smaller. Wisconsin came in at number 9 with a solid C.
Yeah.
And their spot treatment is one of the most hyper-specific things I've seen in this entire project. They are providing zero-interest car loans for working homeless residents.
It is a brilliant intervention because it attacks a very specific, often invisible cycle of poverty.
I have to admit, I was so surprised by this. You picture state programs as these massive, abstract housing initiatives, but a zero-interest car loan. How do they even land on that?
Well, you have to look at the demographics of the unhoused. A significant percentage of people experiencing homelessness actually have full-time jobs.
Right.
For them, keeping that job is their only real pathway out. But if they're living in their car, that vehicle is their locker, it's their bed, and it's their transportation. If the transmission blows, they can't get to work.
And if they can't get to work, they lose their income.
Exactly. And a traditional bank isn't going to give a car loan to someone without a permanent address.
Obviously not.
So they get trapped in a predatory payday loan with like a 400% interest rate, which just bankrupts them in a different way. By stepping in as the lender of a zero-interest loan, Wisconsin is intervening at the exact moment a person might otherwise spiral into chronic street-level homelessness.
Wow.
It's a highly targeted safety net that costs the state very little but yields massive stability.
A literal vehicle for stability. I love that. Now, Pennsylvania took the exact opposite approach. Coming in at number 8, also with the C grade, they didn't do anything flashy like microloans. They just focused on the unglamorous foundational stuff. Building a massive statewide outreach infrastructure paired with an above-average shelter rate.
which is structurally incredibly difficult to pull off.
Yep.
Think about the geography of Pennsylvania. You have major, dense urban centers like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh.
That's right.
But then you have vast stretches of deeply rural counties.
Yeah, homelessness looks entirely different in a forest than it does on a subway grate.
Precisely. Coordinating outreach across those diverse environments requires massive data sharing and interagency cooperation. The fact that Pennsylvania has actually built that network and maintained enough shelter beds to catch the people those outreach workers find gives them a very sturdy baseline. It's not flashy, but it works.
Okay, shifting to number 7, New Jersey, another C grade. But their approach pivots heavily into aggressive funding for the Housing First model, and they pair that with a first-of-its-kind coordinated homelessness prevention plan, specifically in Atlantic City.
Yeah.
But wait, prevention is a completely different game than a response, isn't it?
It is entirely different, and frankly, it is where the smart money is. I mean, New Jersey's aggressive funding for Housing First, the philosophy that you give someone a stable home before requiring sobriety or employment, is a powerful reactive tool. But that Atlantic City Coordinated Prevention Plan, that is all about predictive data.
How so? Like, how are they predicting it?
They're connecting court eviction data directly to social services. So instead of waiting for someone to get locked out of their apartment and then trying to find them a shelter bed, the state intervenes before the sheriff even shows up. Yeah, they coordinate resources to pay the back rent or negotiate with the landlord. Economically, keeping someone in their existing home is always vastly cheaper and more effective than trying to rehouse them after they've already hit the street.
It makes complete sense when you say it like that. Now, coming in at number 6 is Rhode Island with the C+. And I want to push back on this one because there is a massive friction between their policy and their reality.
Oh, for sure.
They boast a nation-leading homeless Bill of Rights. And on paper, guaranteeing the right to exist in public space without harassment sounds phenomenal. But wait, how does a state legally pass a Bill of Rights when they know they don't have the physical shelter beds to fulfill basic needs? Isn't that just political theater?
That is the exact critique many advocates have leveled, and it perfectly highlights the danger of aspirational policy without infrastructure.
Because a legal right to sleep on a park bench doesn't keep you warm in December.
Exactly. You can pass legislation guaranteeing someone the legal right to rest, but if you do not have the physical shelter beds to offer them when night falls, that legal right rings hollow. Rhode Island's policy is legally groundbreaking, absolutely, but because their physical shelter capacity hasn't kept pace, the lived reality for an unhoused person hasn't drastically improved.
The legislation basically just outpaced the funding.
Yep.
Which brings us to number 5, capping off our middle tier. New Mexico, also with a C+. Their spot treatment is entirely about changing the mechanics of who responds to a crisis.
Right.
The city of Albuquerque launched a community safety department that sends trained civilians instead of police officers to homelessness-related calls.
This is a critical shift in the mechanism of enforcement. Historically, in almost every city in America, if a business owner or resident calls 911 about a homeless individual, dispatch routes that to a police officer.
Which inherently frames the situation as a crime before anyone even arrives.
Well, yes. You have an armed officer arriving at a situation that is usually a mental health crisis, a substance issue, or literally just a lack of shelter. It immediately elevates the tension. So Albuquerque changed their dispatch protocols. By sending trained civilians, social workers, mental health professionals, crisis de-escalators, they reframe the response into a public health framework.
And practically speaking, a crisis worker is going to de-escalate that much faster than someone with a badge and a gun. Plus, it has to free up law enforcement to deal with actual violent crime.
Exactly. It lowers the temperature on the street and is a far more efficient use of municipal resources.
So, if that is the middle of the pack, what does it take to break into the top 4? Because we're moving from the C grades into the B- and B+ tier now. What actually separates these top 4 states from the spot treatments we just talked about?
It comes down to a very specific causal connection. The states in the top 4 don't just have 1 or 2 clever programs. What they do is pair strong legislative protections with actual structural, heavily funded investment. They are backing up their laws with their wallets.
Let's see how that looks on the ground. Number 4 is Oregon with a B-. They really stood out for pioneering the village shelter model and for having real court-backed vehicle privacy protections for people living in their cars.
The village shelter model is a fascinating psychological evolution in how we treat the unhoused.
Because traditional congregate shelters can be really chaotic, right? Just like 50 cots in a large gymnasium.
Chaotic, loud, and totally lacking any privacy. For someone with trauma or PTSD, a congregate shelter can be terrifying, which is why many just refuse to go.
Right.
The village model changes the physical architecture. It provides individual, lockable, tiny structures clustered together with shared amenities like kitchens and bathrooms.
Just having a door you can lock behind you?
It restores basic dignity and psychological safety. And when you pair that with Oregon's court-backed vehicle privacy, it shows a massive paradigm shift. The courts there are legally recognizing that if a car is someone's only shelter, it deserves the legal protections against unreasonable search and seizure, just like a brick-and-mortar home.
That is huge.
Yeah.
Okay, number 3 is Connecticut, also scoring a B-. Their standout feature is near total outreach coordination across the entire state and a notably strong retention rate in permanent housing. But how do you actually coordinate a whole state? Bureaucracies notoriously hate sharing data.
That is exactly the hurdle Connecticut managed to clear. They unified their data systems. Often, a person experiencing homelessness will interact with a hospital, a police department, a shelter, and a food bank. And none of those agencies talk to each other.
Yeah.
Connecticut effectively broke down those data silos.
So everyone is working off the same page.
Yes. They essentially have a by-name list of everyone experiencing homelessness. But the second part of their success, the retention, is the real metric. Getting someone into a permanent apartment is only half the battle. If you don't provide the ongoing social services, mental health care, or addiction support they need, they will lose that apartment within a year. Connecticut is incredibly successful at providing the wraparound services to ensure that once a person is housed, they stay housed.
Which brings us to the top 2. Number 2 is Minnesota, pulling a B+. And they perfectly demonstrate this tier's formula. They're pairing strong legislative protections with genuine, deep financial investment in permanent supportive housing.
Minnesota is doing the heavy lifting on both ends of the spectrum. You cannot just mandate solutions without funding them.
Right.
And you can't just throw money at a problem without legal frameworks to guide it.
You actually have to write the checks.
Exactly. Minnesota used state appropriations and bonds to physically build the permanent supportive housing required to get people off the street. They are harmonizing the legal protections with the physical construction.
Which leads us to the number 1 state on the perfectly homeless 50-state scorecard.
Here we go.
Number 1 is Maryland, also scoring a B+.
Yeah.
And their approach is basically a 3-pronged masterclass in policy. They passed the Right to Rest Act, they implemented a vehicle registration fee exemption specifically for the unhoused, and this is the wildest part to me, they are using Medicaid to fund housing case management.
Yeah, Maryland took the top spot because they looked at the entire ecosystem of poverty and found the hidden levers. The Right to Rest Act fundamentally decriminalizes basic human survival in public space.
Right.
And the vehicle registration fee exemption is a surgical strike against the exact cycle we talked about in Wisconsin. It prevents someone from losing their car simply because they couldn't afford a bureaucratic fee.
But hold on, the Medicaid part, how does that even work? You can't just bill the federal government for rent.
No, you can't. And this is where Maryland's bureaucratic innovation is just staggering. They recognize that chronic homelessness is, fundamentally, a massive health crisis. People living on the street consume a disproportionate amount of emergency medical resources.
Okay.
So Maryland went to the federal government and essentially proved that providing a housing case manager is a preventative healthcare measure.
Because getting someone off the street prevents the frostbite, the infections, the ER visits.
Precisely. By successfully classifying housing case management as a medical intervention, they unlocked federal Medicaid matching dollars. They tapped into a massive, sustainable funding stream that most states haven't even figured out how to access.
It is brilliant. So thinking about it like this, if the states in the number 10 to 5 spots are designing a really great car with these spot treatments, it sounds like Maryland and Minnesota are actually paving the roads to drive it on.
That is an excellent way to look at it. They're building the macro infrastructure that allows the micro programs to actually succeed.
Okay, we do have to pivot. We've talked about the top of the mountain, but we have to look at the bottom of the scorecard. There were 4 states that tied for dead last, all receiving a D-. Those states are California, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Missouri.
Yeah.
Now, for you listening, we are looking at this strictly by the numbers. We are impartially reporting the data and the outcomes without endorsing or condemning the political decisions behind them. We just want to understand the why behind these failing grades. And looking at the data, it seems each of these 4 failed for genuinely different reasons.
They really did. If we look at California, their failure is ultimately a failure of cost. They are spending astronomical amounts of state money on the problem, but their housing market is so extreme and the cost of building new units is so inherently unaffordable that it completely overwhelms their spending.
Right.
You cannot buy your way out of a crisis if the baseline cost of entry is fundamentally broken.
Yeah, if it costs $800,000 to build a single unit of affordable housing, the math simply doesn't work. What about Louisiana and Mississippi?
Their failing grades come from a combination of enforcement stacked on top of extreme poverty. Both states recently introduced new criminalization laws targeting the unhoused. The structural issue is that they are applying strict punitive measures in states that possess the absolute least capacity to absorb those populations.
Because if you find someone for sleeping outside, they obviously can't pay it. It turns into a warrant, and then they end up in jail.
Exactly. And jail is incredibly expensive for the taxpayer. Criminalization without shelter alternatives just creates an expensive revolving door of incarceration, which completely tanks their overall scorecard metrics.
And finally, Missouri. Their D- came from a very specific policy choice.
Yes. Missouri's grade is the result of a deliberate policy reversal. They actively walked away from a housing-first model, pivoting back toward models that require sobriety or employment before housing.
Wait, why would they reverse course? Did their own data show the housing first model was working?
It did. Their own internal state data showed that housing first was effectively driving down their homeless population. But the political philosophy shifted, and they reversed the policy anyway. Walking away from a data-proven success disrupted their continuum of care and led to a severe drop in their overall metrics.
Wow. It is a staggering amount of data to take in. But looking at the entire map, all 50 states, from Maryland's B+ down to those 4 D-, there was one unifying theme. One constant that remained true across the entire country, regardless of geography or politics. And honestly, it's a sobering one. Housing affordability was almost nobody's strong suit. Even the absolute highest scoring states on this list struggle immensely to secure basic housing affordability for their residents.
It is the absolute foundation of the entire crisis. Until the fundamental cost of putting a roof over a human being's head is addressed, everything else, no matter how innovative or well-funded, is just treating the symptoms.
50 states, 6 categories each, 300 grades. That's the whole map now, coast to coast.
And honestly, thank you for sticking with us through all of it. This started as one guy asking a question about how America actually treats its homeless population state by state, and it turned into this massive project.
We've laughed a little along the way, too. Hope some of that came through.
It did. So from both of us, thank you for listening, for subscribing, for sending us states to cover, all of it.
This is the last deep dive of the Perfectly Homeless State Scorecard, but it's not really goodbye.
Not even close. Stick around. There's something else coming.
Exactly. A lot of you have been writing in, and we know that AI can feel incredibly overwhelming right now. Like you blinked, the world changed, and it feels like it's just too late to catch up. So our AI media producer, Steven, is going to be hosting an upcoming deep dive where he walks you through just having a basic conversation with an AI called Claude for the very first time. It is specifically for those of you who feel intimidated or too far behind to even try. Steve is going to show you that it is so much less scary than it looks. It's really just a conversation. So look out for that. And as we leave the Perfectly Homeless Project behind, ask yourself this. If even the top-ranked state in America couldn't secure an A grade in basic human shelter, what does that mean for the next generation trying to find a home?